All right. Hi there. This is Paul Glumaz with General Welfare Presents. You've been watching me over the recent period of time. We missed last week. This week is quite significant. Now, today is the 8th of August, and this very interesting situation is developing. And the title of my presentation today is centered on the concept that the controlling narratives are breaking down. In other words, that is the way things are controlled is through narratives, and the mass media is the enforcer of the narrative, and the political class stays within the narrative, or otherwise they run into trouble with the mass media. And behind the mass media is the intelligence community, the financial community, the FBI, and most of all, the intellectual leadership is centered in Great Britain, in the various Centers for Strategic Studies, something called Chatham House, International Institute for Strategic Studies, and then it's they shove it into the Council on Foreign Relations in New York, and into the various outlets, and these become like the party lines. But actually, they are. I wouldn't call them the party lines because it's not a party line. It's a narrative. It's a narrative established. And that's the narrative you have to stay within. If you depart from that narrative, then you essentially are either a conspiracy theorist, or you're fake news, or whatever. Now, that controlling narrative is breaking down, and I'll just go into some examples of that. 19 years ago, Tony Blair in Chicago declared the end of the Westphalian era. And he says we are now entering the post-Westphalian era. And what he was saying was that the world was shifting out of a respect for sovereign nations, which is what came out of the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, to one where there's no respect for sovereign nations, but rather the international, quote, community has the right to intervene anywhere in the world on failed states, or states made to fail. There's a number of ways you can make a state fail, and that this is the responsibility to protect. This is all, the way they explain it. We have the responsibility to protect, and this is the excuse that was used to go into Libya, the excuse that was used to, quote, overthrow the butcher Assad, the excuse used, and the other one that they use is, weapons of mass destruction. They're going to build weapons of mass destruction, weapons of mass destruction, weapons of mass destruction. And you find out there were no efforts in Iraq to build weapons of mass destruction. So this idea that the international community has a right to terminate and intervene on nations and all of that was the thing that came out of Tony Blair's mouth, and this whole network of people that were part of this right to protect network later became part of the Obama administration. And then came 9/11, which was the excuse to then go with these policies. And so we've been living in this manifold of the right to protect, human rights, butchers. We got to do something about these butchers. And in every case, the butchers are sovereign nations which are resisting the international financial system, or are resisting going along with the policies of a one world order. Now, one of the major countries that resisted this, of course, is Putin of Russia. Another major country that resisted this, of course, is China. And other countries smaller countries that resisted this, they've come under heavy attack. Syria, is one of them. Libya, Iraq. And now there are other nations that are doing the same thing. Turkey, Iran, especially Iran. And so the idea is that this is the new post-Westphalian era. The second aspect of it is that this is the clash of civilizations. The idea is that the Cold War ended, and now the main thing is the clash of civilizations. You have, Chinese Confucian civilization versus Western civilization. You have Islamic versus Christian. You have traditional cultures versus modern neoliberal cultures. You have all these different clash of civilizations. This is now replacing the Cold War as the driving force in the world. And so you saw all of that going on, especially starting in the 90s, and then increasing in the first decade of the century, and then it increased until now. So you have all these wars going on, or insoluble conflicts. You have the North Korea situation. You have India versus Pakistan, which has been a conflicted situation since independence in 1949. You have China versus India, which have had 2 border wars, and they were about to have a 3rd one last year. You have all of the issues in the Middle East. The Arab-Israeli issue. You have the Shia versus Sunni operation. This is Iran, which is a Shia country, versus Saudi Arabia and all the other Sunni countries, and on you go. And then you have the situation in the Horn of Africa, where you have a perpetual war has been going on all the time. Initially under Haile Selassie, between Ethiopia and Eritrea, which is seeking independence from Ethiopia, and there was a massive long-term war about that. And then later there was a war between Somalia and Ethiopia under Haile Selassie, which was represented the switching of sides between the Soviet Union and the U.S. And then you had the breakdown of Yugoslavia. Of Somalia into warlords, and then you had a communist guy under the a pro-Soviet communist guy under forgot his name, and then you had a guerrilla movement from a province in Ethiopia, Tigray, Tigrayan movement that takes over, and then they overthrow the communist leader, whose name is Mengistu. I finally remembered it, Mengistu, and then they sort of are in control, and then there's a vast majority of individuals who do not identify with either the ruling Amharic group, which was under Haile Selassie, and Mengistu, and the ruling. Well, Mengistu kind of leveled everything, but they didn't identify with the Tigrayan crowd that ran Ethiopia. Meanwhile, a war broke out between Eritrea, which had its own liberation movement, and which helped the Tigrayans take control of Ethiopia. But the war broke out later between the two of them. So you have Eritrea warring with Ethiopia, and you have Somalia, and all of that, and now everything's changed. You got a new leader who's half Oromo, half Amharic. He's bringing peace to the region, but on what basis is he bringing peace in the region? He's bringing peace in the region based on what? On the Belt and Road Initiative. So what's really going on is that the Belt and Road Initiative that China launched over 5 years ago is now coming to that part of Africa, and what it's creating is a unification of cooperation between forces that have been at war ever since the end of World War II, and this is Somalia, elements in Somalia with Ethiopia and Eritrea. Now the peace is now being made between Eritrea and Ethiopia. They're now talking about joint development. They're talking about with Somalia for joint development. This is a revolutionary process that is ending this series of wars. A similar potential exists in the Middle East, although the Middle East is a lot more complicated. You see what's going on in Korea. The new elected Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, who was backed by the military, has declared that the economic model for developing Pakistan is China, what China's doing. And he announced that for every positive gesture India makes towards Pakistan, Pakistan will make 2 positive gestures, or 2 steps to 1 step. Now, who is Imran Khan? Well, it doesn't really matter who Imran Khan is, but he is representing a different spirit. A spirit that is not in any way connected to the Islamic business. He is not an Islamicist. And what's happening right now is that there is a process going on of healing the relationship between India and Pakistan. What's the basis of that? The Belt and Road Initiative. That's what's the basis. And all of this is vectored into the development of Africa, which is very key. 1.3 billion people in Africa. The development of Africa is the gateway to massive development of the world. And of course, once you have a policy like that emerging, then then there's no reason to continue the conflicts, because the conflicts get in the way of the development, and people in general want development. It's only the powers that created these conflicts and manipulated these conflicts based in the oligarchies in Wall Street and the City of London that don't want this development. Okay, so what's happening now is the whole narrative of the world being, Africa being backward, and all of that narrative is being attacked. The whole idea that you can't develop them, they're poor, you gotta, they're corrupt, they have all these problems, that's why they are who they are. No, they're being raped and looted by the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and so forth. That's why they are where they are. Now they have a different system that they're moving towards, the Belt and Road system. And then this sets up the whole basis for a post-dollar system, because the dollar, the more you do sanctions on countries, the more you attack countries, the more you create the necessity for trade to occur outside the dollar system. And already there's a vast expansion of trade going on internationally outside the dollar system, using currency swaps, using gold, using yuan, which is the Chinese currency, and so forth. So you have all of this going on, and so the narrative of how the world's supposed to work is breaking down. Now you come to the United States, and you have Donald Trump as the president, and the narrative that's going on with Donald Trump is that he is a Putin stooge. Now that's the narrative, but there's no evidence of that, and there never will be any evidence of that, because it's totally insane. It's totally off the wall. But yet this is the narrative, and that narrative is being attacked every day by the revelations that are coming out from the Senate and from the House intelligence committees. The latest revelation is that Christopher Steele was working with the FBI with Strzok, who was the principal FBI aide directly to the office of John Brennan in the CIA. So this whole thing is looking more and more like a conspiracy run by the British through the FBI and through Brennan personally, then CIA director. Now, who is John Brennan? He was the station chief before he left the communist movement in the middle 70s. He was a communist. He got into the CIA, and then he became station chief in Saudi Arabia. He became fluent in Arabic. Some people claim he converted to Islam. It doesn't really matter whether he did or not. And then he became the drone advisor in chief to Obama. That is, he ran the drone campaigns in Somalia and Pakistan and these different places. And who did he run them on behalf of? Saudi Arabia. And then he's made CIA director. So this is the guy who worked with Saudi Arabia. So everyone in the Beltway knows that the Saudis were involved in 9/11, that the hijackers were being financed by the Saudi government. Okay, everyone knows that. And that's what the 28 pages in the 9/11 that were finally declassified are about. But everybody knows that. That means that everybody knows that that's the case, and everyone knows that that's how the system is, that 9/11 set up the basis for this whole imperial system, this aggressive war, these aggressive wars. But the narrative is collapsing. Why? Because it's becoming clear that the British, in collusion with, through Christopher Steele and others, in collusion with John Brennan, set up this guy Helper to set up the Trump campaign with evidence that there was Russia collusion. So on and on it goes. So the narrative is of Russiagate is collapsing. Now there's another narrative which is going on, which is the human rights narrative, which is the LBGT narrative, that countries like Russia and China don't respect the human rights of terrorists. They don't respect the human rights of LGBTs, etc. And for that they need to have sanctions. And also the other thing is this global warming, and you know, we're all going to fry. When Obama was in South Africa, before he was no longer president, he told the Africans, if you guys ever come, if you guys were ever to have American middle class living standards, you know, the planet would boil over. That was his idea of African development, as a threat to boil over the planet. And he said that to these Africans to their face, which is probably why his half brother and best man at his wedding campaigned against him and campaigned for Trump, because he's an African and he wants Africa to be developed. So this is the kind of situation that you have. So the narrative is breaking down. Now yesterday or 2 days ago, the social media began shutting down access to InfoWars and other websites that shut down their YouTube and other platforms. Why? They claim that it's because we're a private group, that is YouTube and Apple and so forth and so on. We're private companies. We're not subject to the First Amendment. We don't have to obey the First Amendment. We can do whatever we want. But the basis on which we're doing it is that there's stuff on Alex Jones's InfoWars which implies violence. Well, no, it's not violent. It implies violence. Well, that's an interpretation. Or it's a hate crime. So they're shutting down access to YouTube, etc. And when you have 17 million visitors every month going to the YouTube channel of Alex Jones, and they shut down YouTube, that's 17 million people who are going to be pissed off, right? Why are you shutting down this? But they went ahead anyhow, because there's a massive campaign to create a Congress that will impeach the president. And that's what this is all about, is creating a situation where the discussion that is going on in places like that does not get out to the public. I'm of the opinion that the LaRouche movement is being shadow banned, where you send out, and it doesn't get sent out. And I suspect that that's what's going on with the LaRouche group. But this is because the narrative is breaking down. Their control of the narrative, Russiagate, the control of the narrative being human rights, and the control of the narrative around the environmental stuff is breaking down. More and more people are investigating on their own the various claims that are being made, and it's breaking down. The whole thing is breaking down. Now, what this means on an international scale is that we're entering a new system. The new system is defined by the Belt and Road. And with that new system is going to have to become a new financial architecture for the world. And that's what's in the process of occurring. Now, there's some very interesting items developing around Donald Trump's confrontation with the Federal Reserve. And Donald Trump is going to be able to appoint 6 of the 7 board members of the Federal Reserve. And it's very possible that Donald Trump could turn the Federal Reserve into a national bank and force it to make credit for development. So this is something that is potential there. This is a potentiality. Another thing that's going on is that Donald Trump is pushing for a revival of manufacturing. Now, again, this goes against the narrative. What's the narrative? Well, we don't need manufacturing. China can do it. Mexico can do it. All these poor places, why don't we send our jobs overseas to these poor places? You know, they can do it. We don't need manufacturing. We just need to have financial services and other services. And what Trump is saying, no, if you don't have manufacturing, you're not producing, you're not creating physical wealth, and you also don't have a population that's employed at a decent enough wage that makes it possible for them to have a decent existence. You have to produce something. You can't just live off the rest of the world's production and not have anything to exchange it for, except the fact that the dollar system is the system that they have to use, and therefore you take advantage of the fact that they have to use it. You know, currency speculation against all the currencies creates a tax on trade. You know, free trade is not. You have two systems. You have the speculative financial system, which is based on profit through speculation, off of currencies, off of trade, versus directed credit system, where you actually put the money into investment and development, and then you have trade related to that. That trade is different from the other kind of trade where you're actually using the trade to tax both the producer and the consumer. And the other one, you're using trade to expand infrastructure, to expand development. That's a different system. That's the Hamiltonian system. And that's the system the Chinese have been using very effectively. And they're about to surpass, they're about to become, within a matter of less than a decade, they're about to become the most advanced scientific and technological producers of high tech. And this is totally freaking out the Wall Street, City of London crowd. So we are entering this period where the empire is disintegrating, where the narratives are collapsing, where individuals are now coming up to us in the street and discussing the fact that they're beginning to understand that it is the British at the center of this thing, that it is the European oligarchy at the center of this thing, that economic development isn't going to happen until the deep state is defeated. There is a sense of that increasingly in the population. And all of the actions of the deep state through YouTube and Apple and Google and so forth are going to boomerang in that direction. Now, yesterday was a primary day and a special election day. It looks like the individuals that Trump supported, 5 out of 5, have won their races. This is very significant. Trump has also gone into a war with the Koch brothers. The Koch brothers have been the major, and the grouping around the Koch brothers have been the major funders of the Republican Party, whereas George Soros and his grouping have been the major funders of the Democratic Party. So it's the Koch brothers versus George Soros. It's not much of a choice. Both of them want a population. Both of them want to destroy the population through drugs. Both of them want to legalize all the drugs and promote the drug culture. One is a conservative, says they're conservative. The other says they're liberal. But they're the same thing. But they control the parties with the money. And Trump has gone into a battle with the Koch brothers. This is very significant. So the Koch brother candidates are not faring well in so far in the Republican Party. Meanwhile, the Democratic liberals have gone completely off the deep end, and they're going into this whole hate crime thing. We got to shut down Fox. We got to shut down Trump's Twitter account. You know, these people are like, you know, because it's a hate crime. You know, these people are off their rocker, and increasingly that will be demonstrated in the elections.